The following episode of the Maui Chamber of Commerce's Business Matters radio program was originally broadcast on March 22nd, 2022.
Aloha and welcome, Maui, to the Maui Chamber of Commerce's Business Matters radio show, sponsored by Mokulele Airlines. I'm your host, Pamela Tumpot, president of the Maui Chamber of Commerce. Today, we are going to talk about really important topics that's on everybody's mind, like business inflation and some of the misconceptions out there, workforce development and supply chain issues, and the latest on legislative happenings. We're also going to look at Hawaii's recovery now. And, as we're seeing restrictions going down and mandates are being lifted, what's happening with these, with our recovery? We're looking at rising energy costs and the impacts and the effects of war. And we're going to speak with a local State Farm insurance agent who is also a 3-time Hawaiian Music Award winner and professional saxophonist. So it is going to be a great morning. I hope you can join us for the whole session. But first, we'd like to start with Jennings Imel. He is the Executive Director of the Western Regional Office, Congressional and Public Affairs Division of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Jennings has been on the show before, and he joined the U.S. Chamber in 2013. Jennings worked in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress and at the public affairs firm Mercury, Clark, and Weinstock. Jennings received a master's degree in international affairs from the George Washington University and a bachelor's degree in political science and German from the University of California, Riverside. Good morning, Jennings, and mahalo for joining us again on the show.
Of course. Good morning, Pam. Great to be with you again, and thanks as always for having me. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. We always love having you on the show. There is so much work that you folks are constantly doing on our behalf, representing businesses across the nation, and we truly appreciate that, especially in these times when there are so many issues out there that COVID exacerbated. And, one of the things that we keep seeing is that we're seeing a lot of people right now, as we watch the inflation going up, people blaming the businesses and the industry for the inflation. Can you shed some light on that for us?
Yes, absolutely. So, I don't think it comes as a surprise to any of your listeners that inflation is a top issue. It's pretty much a top issue for everybody, but certainly for the business community. We recently conducted a survey of small businesses around the country and found, not surprisingly, that inflation was the number one issue that they were concerned with.
Yes.
Supply chains, workforce, of course, also big. 67% of small businesses have had to increase their prices as a result of inflation. We've all seen the numbers, 7.9% inflation in February of 2022. Those numbers continue to trend in the wrong direction.
Right.
And the White House has even admitted that it could get a lot worse before it gets better over the next several months. So this is a major issue that's impacting just about everybody, and we need to take it seriously. Congress needs to take it seriously. The White House needs to take it seriously. And one of the first things quite frankly, the administration needs to start doing is stop blaming business for inflation. And we've seen a lot of that kind of rhetoric come out of the administration. And I think you're going to see it over the next couple of weeks as oil and gas executives come to Capitol Hill to testify to various committees on rising gas prices. That's an attempt to kind of shift the narrative away from blaming the administration for rising prices and instead kind of put blame on oil and gas companies in this case, but just business in general. And we saw the same thing, just a couple of weeks ago with the State of the Union address that President Biden gave. I think there were 18 different mentions of inflation. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of solutions about kind of what we're going to be doing to tackle inflation, but a number of businesses and a number of industries, were criticized for, being culprits in rising prices. You saw mentions of the pharmaceutical industry, oil and gas, meat packers, shippers, saying, I think President Biden even said at one point that we're going to crack down on shippers and other people that are that are raising prices, and I think that kind of rhetoric needs to stop because this is a supply and demand issue.
Right.
We have too many dollars in the system chasing too few goods, and we all know, kind of what has generally led to this. There are a number of factors that have led to the inflationary pressures that we've seen. But we've got supply chain disruptions. We're still trying to play catch up from the pandemic. Those disruptions continue to mount. We're seeing new disruptions now in China and
Right.
additional closures in the Pacific. We've got, of course, a workforce crisis, the fact that we can't find workers and companies are having to pay more for their workforce. That's obviously leading to an increase in prices. Excessive government stimulus, quite frankly, with the American Rescue Plan. There were some good things, obviously, that came from that, but we probably overshot the mark a little bit with $1.9 trillion. We spent over $6 trillion in total on COVID relief, so probably too much money going into the system. Of course, we have the new shock with Russia and Ukraine and the effects on oil and gas and commodities. And then we still have tariffs that are in place as well that are also kind of leading to artificial price increases across the board. So these are all the factors that are leading to the inflationary pressures that we have right now. This is not on the business community. And so the administration has to, I think they have to understand that first, and then we have to start looking at solutions, whether it's in the energy sector, food, housing. I mean, there are some areas where we can really try to help put some downward pressure on prices. But blaming the business community is definitely not the right thing to do at this point.
I wholeheartedly agree. And as you know, we're having a lot of discussions, as people are all across the country, about minimum wage. And the challenge is Hawaii has such a high living wage. And people keep correlating the minimum wage with the living wage and saying, look, people can't afford to live here. And it's true. We are struggling. We are woefully behind on housing units. And our cost of living here, because gas and, the gas that we need, our energy, everything costs more. And the inputs that we all bring in food and all of the services, all the products that we need to even make our own products, everything's brought in. And then we also have to pay to ship it out again. And so we keep trying to use the minimum wage as the lever to help us bridge the gap between the living wage and the minimum wage. And what we really need to start looking at is broader solutions so that we're addressing, these higher costs and the factors here in Hawaii and building more affordable housing and rentals. And as you say, across the nation, there are so many different ways to look at solutions to all of this. And we do have to stop blaming businesses and demonizing businesses for saying they're not doing the right thing. And the public, keeps talking about inflation, but they don't realize that when you keep also raising business costs, those costs get passed on. And so, we just keep exacerbating the challenges. So what is the U.S. Chamber proposing, if anything, in terms of some of the solutions that you'd like to see the administration consider?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, this should make it absolutely clear to policymakers in Washington, D.C., that Build Back Better or anything like Build Back Better, the reconciliation package that would spend anywhere between $2 and $4 trillion, that's got to be dead. We can discuss and debate the merits of particular provisions of that bill all day long, but certainly at a point right now where we're sitting at 8% inflation, passing a massive, demand-heavy bill like that is certainly not the right thing to do. So that's first and foremost. Have to make sure that does not see the light of day again. Second, and you kind of mentioned it, housing. We have to focus on housing. We have to focus on energy. Even food, commodities. I think that there's kind of some space for us to get involved there as well. But certainly on the energy side, and that's another point of disappointment, quite frankly, from the State of the Union address and where the administration has been in kind of responding to what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. Is like one of the obvious solutions here, not only for our own gas prices, but kind of just geopolitically to help our allies in the European Union and elsewhere, is to boost domestic energy production.
Right.
We still have a ban on new oil and gas leases on federal lands. That obviously needs to be changed. But then also there's all kinds of permitting problems with pipelines that we've been pushing for. There's I think there's something like 4 or 5 LNG export terminals that are still awaiting permits from the Department of Energy that we still need to kind of push to get online. There are a lot of things that the administration can do to help boost domestic energy production. And I think that doing those things will certainly put some downward pressure on gasoline prices and on energy prices. And that, of course, plays a huge role in inflation. So just doing that, even though it'll take years, of course, to fully materialize, just sending that simple signal can have an immediate effect on markets. So we have to do that. The housing side is another really big one. We have to find ways that we can cut red tape for housing, to produce more housing, like you said, affordable housing. And that's a difficult one because a lot of this, there's certainly a role for the federal government, but, states are oftentimes more intricately involved here. But at the U.S. Chamber, we're going to be looking at opportunities to engage with our state and local partners, state and local chamber partners, and see, where we can weigh in effectively and try to get more housing on the market, because we're at a huge housing deficit right now. And that's also going to, lead to, that already has led to increased costs of living, of course. But on the inflation side, too, housing is actually a lagging indicator. We haven't seen that fully come into fruition yet. And I think for the next several months, we're going to start seeing that as kind of leases come up. Right. And we have new lease agreements coming into place that are going to reflect now current inflation numbers. We're going to start to see housing really become also a major driver of inflation. So got to get serious about what we can do to reduce red tape to get housing online. I think kind of focusing on those areas is really going to help us in curbing some of these inflationary pressures.
I absolutely agree. Well, you also kind of talked about it already. So we've got these supply chain issues and we've got workforce issues. Give us a update there on, we've talked before about how do we break this logjam on the supply chain issues. And again,
right.
And what's happening on the national level as we're looking for, everybody's desperately looking for workers.
Yes, absolutely. And both of these issues are obviously intertwined. The supply chains continue to be, we continue to see bottlenecks because we don't have enough workers in logistics or in trucking and right. various industries. So that's going to continue to be a problem on the supply chain issue kind of globally. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've got now kind of renewed COVID restrictions, shutdowns, lockdowns that are taking place in China. We see kind of factories going offline for weeks at a time. We're going to continue to see the same thing, I think, throughout the Asia Pacific. So it's kind of leading to even more supply chain pressures. We still have, I think just the last month we saw anywhere between 90 and 100 ships that are continuing to be anchored on a daily basis on average off the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. That gives you a pretty good indication of where things are at. By the way, in normal times, you don't see really any ships like that, not even anywhere close to that number. So unfortunately, the supply chains are going to continue to be a problem, I think, over the next several months. I think we're starting to see that ease a little bit as we get beyond that initial shock of the pandemic, the big swings in demand, and supply chains start to play catch-up. But on the workforce issue, we're still 5 million short. I mean, we had 11.3 million job openings in February. We have 6.3 million unemployed. That's just a huge problem. 74 workers for every 100 jobs in this country.
Wow.
And unfortunately, there's not an easy or obvious solution to that. And I think the workforce problem is going to continue to be a big one, really for the rest of the year and beyond.
Yeah, well, it's sobering news, but it's news we need to hear because we need to be planning forward. And we were hoping as we saw the restrictions ease that a lot more of our challenges were going to be reduced. And yet we're finding, right. That while we're grateful that we're seeing the mandates go down and end and we're able to get out and about and stop wearing masks here in Hawaii very shortly, there's still a lot of things to continue to tackle. So,
right. And nationwide, we're seeing more workers come off the sidelines, as kind of some of the federal stimulus and the relief that was out there, starts to go away and workers start to come back into the workforce. We're seeing a little bit more of that. We're seeing a lot of job creation. Hawaii, by the way, led the country in the number of job openings in February of 2022 as a percentage. So, I mean, that's a good thing. But in Hawaii also, labor force participation is down more than it is in other states. When looking compared to February of 2020, right before the pandemic, Hawaii labor force participation is down 12.4%. That's a huge drop, biggest drop in the country. And so there are a lot of folks that left the workforce for myriad reasons, but we've got to think about how we can get them back involved. And there are a lot of issues that we're working on. The U.S. Chamber, certainly, whether it's immigration related, obviously that's going to play a role. But then also what employers can do, whether it's getting veterans or spouses of veterans back into the workforce, or second chance employers, right, that want to give folks that have maybe a criminal background, a criminal record, a second chance, because that's kind of there's a whole pool of individuals right there that oftentimes are overlooked. So I think we need to start getting very creative, and so we've been working, especially the U.S. Chamber Foundation has been working and kind of trying to lead those employer-sponsored solutions, because These are kind of systemic issues that we're going to be dealing with for a long time, and we need to get creative about how to tackle it.
I agree. And I appreciate the work that the U.S. Chamber Foundation is doing in that area, because, we do need to look at alternate solutions, and I know people are getting creative here, but I think in some of the usual ways, we're hearing incentives and lots of job fairs, and actually now we're seeing, instead of companies participating in job fairs, companies doing their own job fairs, and a lot of things going on as everybody's kind of looking at how they share their attraction package. Lots of commercials just focused on employees and trying to encourage people to gain information about and join their team on television right now. So it's very interesting to see, but we are in a state where people are desperate for workers, and so wages are going up, and people are paying more as they're looking to bring other people onto their team. So it's an interesting time, and it's a little scary to know that we might be looking at this for a while. And unfortunately, it's very scary to hear, that again, in terms of the workforce being down, 12.4%, the largest in the country. That's a huge number. So tell us about also some of the legislative highlights that you folks are watching, and some of your predictions for the rest of the year.
Sure. Well, on the workforce issue, I'd love to be able to predict that we're going to get immigration reform done, right? or even anything immigration related. That certainly would be nice, and that would help on a number of fronts. And we're going to continue to push for, certainly, there's a lot of different solutions that are out there on immigration and how we can boost kind of the immigrant worker visa programs and get more folks in here, and just get the State Department, quite frankly, to be able to process some of these visa applications that we still have in the queue. We have such a deficiency. We're missing 1 million college-educated immigrant workers, because of, quite frankly, the pandemic. Right? When you look at the numbers from 2019 to 2022, they have just fallen off a cliff. Because of that. So there are obvious solutions there, and we hope that Congress will take this seriously. But we understand, it's a midterm political year. It's difficult enough, in normal circumstances to get anything immigration related across the finish line. But still, just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we're not going to do it. In fact, it just kind of underscores the importance of doing it. So we're going to continue to push for kind of immigration. Language there and immigration bills that can help kind of remedy some of these workforce crises that we're seeing. But, realistically, for the rest of the year, I think, we've got a pretty busy calendar on the Senate side, certainly. And, we were talking about it before the call, Pam, with the Supreme Court nomination and kind of going through the hearings there. That's going to take some time. We also have, of course, Russia continues to be an issue. I think that there's still going to continue to be congressional action on kind of dealing with Russian trade status and things like that, banning oil and energy imports from Russia. But I think that the big bipartisan legislative package that we could see move, maybe even the last kind of quote-unquote train leaving the station in D.C., would be the China competition bill. The Senate passed a U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, it's the USICA, and then the House passed their own version. It's called the Competes Act. Two different bills, but they kind of deal with, how do we bring semiconductor supply chains, back into the United States and boost more, production of semiconductors, AI development, research and development. Really good things. We're supportive of all of those endeavors. And it's good to see that there's bipartisan kind of energy behind these proposals. And we're going to see over the next couple of weeks a conference committee get put together where the Senate and the House will be able to hash out the differences, and we can hopefully get a competition bill that will really help. And that, by the way, helps on the supply chain front. Maybe not immediately, but over long term, that's going to be really beneficial for bringing, critical supply chains back to the United States. We should see that coming together over the next several weeks, maybe even months. After that, you get into June, July of 2022, we're into full-on political election season. It's going to be very difficult to pass major pieces of legislation, especially on a bipartisan basis. So that could be the last train leaving the station, but I think that it's a good one. And so we're hopeful that that'll get done relatively soon. And then, of course, we're into full-on midterm election mode, and, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out as always.
Well, locally as well as nationally, I think this is just such a critical election for everybody. It's a really important time to look. I'm glad to hear about the bills. For years we've been seeing a lot of our manufacturing go overseas, and we used to be a leader in manufacturing, and it's important to bring that back, and especially in those critical areas that you mentioned that we've been so reliant on what's been going on in China. So exciting to see that be coming back, and boy, you guys must be very busy.
Yes, we are, absolutely. And then, once we get into political season, we obviously, at the U.S. Chamber, we endorse candidates, for running for House, running for Senate, and we're going to be very involved, more so than ever, maybe even this year, just because of how difficult things are in Washington, D.C. We all know how polarized things are. We anticipate that's not going to change anytime soon. In fact, we could be seeing a Republican takeover of the House. That's probably likely at this point. Republican takeover of the Senate, also possibly likely. It's a little bit more of a toss-up there. But we'll still have President Biden, a Democrat, in the White House. And so we're going to have potentially divided government. It's going to be difficult to get things done, but, we're going to need to see bipartisan solutions to tackle all the issues that the business community is facing, whether it's inflation or, housing issues or, healthcare, whatever it happens to be, all these the workforce issues, these issues that I mentioned earlier on this call. We need bipartisan solutions, and so we're going to be very much engaged in growing the number of pro-business members on both parties. Doesn't matter R, D next to your name. We're looking for pro-business champions that work across the aisle and can get things done. So we're trying to grow that contingent in Washington, D.C., and that's going to be a major, major focus of ours in 2022.
Well, I really appreciate that. And, we, too, at the Maui Chamber of Commerce, do candidate endorsements. We're nonpartisan, we're not sectarian, but we look for business-friendly candidates, people who understand economics and business issues. And the key thing and of course, at the local levels, it's not really about party, but it doesn't matter at all levels. What we need is people willing to work together and, not just stand staunch in a position, but willing to hear both sides so we can come together and find winning solutions. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, Jennings. I appreciate you always being able to join us for our show. It's a treasure to have you on, and we learn so much. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks. You do the same, Pam, and thanks for all that you do at the Maui Chamber in advocating on behalf of the business community there. Much appreciated.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you so much, Jennings. Take care, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks. You too, Pam.
Thank you.
Bye.
Aloha. Okay, we're going to take a quick break to hear from Mokulele Airlines, our sponsor. Mokulele Airlines operates the largest commuter airline hub in the country, right here in Kahului. Fly Mokulele from Kahului to Molokai, Lanai, Hana, Waimea, Kona, and now Hilo. Mokulele also operates the only flights between Kapalua and Honolulu. There is never a middle seat on Mokulele, and every seat has a window and aisle. Visit mokuleleairlines.com and take your next flight from the newly renovated Mokulele Terminal. And we're back. If you're just tuning in, this is Business Matters, brought to you by the Maui Chamber of Commerce. We're now going to speak with Paul Brubaker, the principal of TZ Economics, a Hawaii economics consultancy. His background in research on the Hawaii economy and financial risk analytics stems from a 25-year affiliation with Bank of Hawaii, concluding as its chief economist. He is a graduate of Stanford University, did graduate work at the University of Wisconsin, and received his PhD in economics from the University of Hawaii. Paul has lectured extensively in international, monetary, and financial economics, and is always a pleasure to be with and so much fun. Good morning, Paul. So great to have you on the show this morning.
Aloha, Pam. Nice to hear your voice again.
Oh, nice to hear you as well. So we're getting to an interesting time as we're seeing all of our restrictions and mandates being lifted in Hawaii, and as we're starting to reopen. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of our recovery in both domestic and international visitor markets?
Well, tourism has had a rough ride in the last 9 to 12 months because of the recent variants.
Yes.
And we're not out of the woods yet. Each of the last two variant waves, the Delta wave and the Omicron wave resulted in about a 25% reduction in day and weekly passenger arrivals. I can do a seasonal adjustment at weekly frequencies. It's almost impossible to do it at daily frequencies, but we do have these fantastic daily data now that allow for real-time tracking.
Wow.
So, things are coming back as Omicron fades, and it's encouraging as we build into the through the spring break into the heavy summer travel season, seasonal travel season. We were at or near 2019 volumes in the early part of July last year, but then, of course, the Delta wave broke.
Right.
And we should be on guard for the BA.2 or Deltacron variant or any other variant that may show up. My concern is that we won't be able to respond as a community as rapidly now that some of these restrictions have been lifted. And so that continues to be a risk factor for the ongoing economic recovery in 2022.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying. I know people are really looking forward to the freedom. We're seeing more people get out. Some people are saying they're still choosing to wear their masks even when the mask mandates are lifted. And we're watching what's happening in China as we see BA2 being a new wave there. So what are we? And I think we had cases here in Hawaii as well, didn't we? On BA2, I don't remember what the count was.
It's hard to track for a couple of reasons. One of which is that people's attention has turned elsewhere, and not without reason. But as a result, the media have focused elsewhere, and even the state of Hawaii isn't publishing morbidity data on a daily basis anymore. Hawaii's joined Florida in publishing weekly statistics. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, and I don't know. They don't have enough money, evidently, as the Department of Health. So we just don't have the kind of information we even had 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
And I'm a little concerned about that because we've had 4 waves. I think, depending on how you count it, the U.S. has probably had 5. And we in Hawaii have had 4 waves. But part of the reason, we had a better experience in Hawaii is because we were more rigorous in our non-pharmaceutical interventions in 2020. In 2021, on the other hand, here, at least on Oahu, the new mayor decided to rip everything out. So people on Oahu have been kind of on their own for the last year. And, of course, way more people have died in Hawaii and have gotten sick. I think the last time I counted, in the last 3 months, 1 out of every 10 people on Oahu got COVID during Omicron, during the Omicron wave.
Wow.
So that's what happens when you rip off your mask. But you mentioned East Asia, where they too had very strict protocols in place in Australia, New Zealand, and all through East Asia. Very strict protocols until the Omicron wave. And as they've lifted or relaxed their protocols, Omicron has found its way in. So it's not over yet. I know people, want to make believe it is. And, good luck with that.
Well, I'm really glad, Paul, that you're pointing a couple things out. One is we're also used to hearing the daily counts, but we don't correlate it to what you just said, that what we saw is actually 1 in 10 were catching COVID. I mean, so we see the numbers, but we don't sort of break it down to what that means. And I think when you break it down the way you are, it's more enlightening.
The way people, I think, communicated it informally over the Christmas and New Year's holiday, and then building to a peak around Martin Luther King Day, let's say. And the wave did abate by the time we got to President's Day. But if you think about the arc of the holiday season from Thanksgiving through February, through President's Day, the way people talked about it was that you commonly heard that everybody knew somebody that had COVID
Yep.
in the last 3 months.
Yep,
And
very
that's,
true.
That's just as reliable as tracking the data on a daily basis. My point is that I think we do rely on conventional media sources, and unfortunately probably are excessively reliant on informal social media sources of information. But if you choose, as has the state of Hawaii, not even to report the data on a daily basis, then it signals that people don't need to pay attention, and I think that that's actually really dangerous. To give an analogy, after 9/11, a small group of nerds like me, economists and statisticians, were asked by Governor Cayetano at the time what the first thing we ought to do about 9/11 is, and we immediately said, the guy who tracks the passengers' manifests every day at Airports Division, that guy should publish those data every day. And Airports Division provided the data to DBED, and those data are published every day. We have daily passenger counts. Why would you ever stop that once you have it? So it's a little surprising to me that, I'm told it's a money thing. I don't know how they have computers. So my point, the attention is focused elsewhere, and I think it creates a certain vulnerability. And the risk with respect to tourism is that I can show you in the data that each one of the last two waves induced a decline in travel volume.
Right.
So that if we're going to just be on that roller coaster, it's going to be a tough recovery. It's going to be a Groundhog Day recovery, right?
Right.
Every 6 months you wake up and wait, are we starting over again?
Yeah, here we go again. Yeah, same thing, yeah.
I have my fingers crossed for this summer, but as I say, we got all the way back last summer. Remember, the constraint is not who can travel to Hawaii, because not everybody can. Foreigners largely can't travel to Hawaii at all, still.
Yeah.
And right now, from East Asia, maybe we wouldn't want them to. I'm just saying, they're having big issues in East Asia. But the constraint is the lodging capacity, and that hasn't changed in 30 years. So when the rooms fill up, when you get to 80%, 83% occupancy, you're essentially filled up. And that's where we were around 4th of July last year for a brief moment. At a moment, the lieutenant governor got into an argument publicly with the governor about whether the indoor mask mandate ought to be lifted.
Yeah.
I think it's July 9th. I heard that. I remember these dates because it's such a bizarre thing. Like literally 3 or 4 weeks before the Delta variant explodes, we're having a debate about whether we should remove the indoor mask mandate. And then came a 20% reduction in travel because of the Delta wave itself. So just be cautious. Be ready to jump back into action to help protect one another, our kupuna, and young kids who can't get vaccinated still, because you just don't know what the next variant. We got lucky with Omicron, but luck is not a strategy.
Right. No, I appreciate the warning. I think it's imperative that we be cautious and we be ready, and to know that the data is not being kept up the way we might think it is. Even though we're not hearing it on the news, we might think, well, as you said, the news has moved on, but now we know that it's not being tracked in the same way, and that's a whole different level.
There are plenty of other things to be concerned with,
Yes.
Political events, the inflation, ongoing inflation. So I understand the need to move on, but here's a trivia question for you. Which was the worst year of the influenza pandemic in 1918 and 1919 for Hawaii, in terms of excess mortalities, or in terms of just the sheer number of deaths? Which was the worst year of the 1918-1919 influenza pandemic? The answer? 1920. So, when somebody asks you, which was the worst year of the 2020-2021 coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, you do not want the answer to be 2022. So
that's right.
Let's just keep up our guard and remember that we've all learned how to work a little differently now. We've embraced e-commerce a little more aggressively. We've learned that takeout can be just as good as dining in. and it helps the food service industry one way or the other. So don't give up yet. But yes, let's definitely move forward.
Well, and on that note, you started talking about some of the other things that are top of mind. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening with inflation, and the connection with the war.
Yeah, I think here again, it's really important to understand in Hawaii that the data can be different, and so what you hear in the national media scape is the statement. Things often boil down to a soundbite, and the soundbite right now is that it's the highest inflation in 40 years. I keep hearing that one. Well, I'm sure it's true somewhere, but not in Hawaii. so the inflation in Hawaii is as high as it was the last time it was this high, which is about 2006-ish, I think, which was lower than in 1990, which in turn was lower 40 years ago in the early 1980s. So right off the top, it's important to understand that, your mileage may vary. And the inflation in Hawaii has been running in the range, let's say 6.5% or so. It's been about a percentage point lower than the national average. Nationwide, which means that somewhere in the country, it's way higher, right? Because the national average is an average.
Right.
And Hawaii is not experiencing as much of the inflationary pressure because the underlying economy itself, broadly speaking, has not experienced as robust a recovery. And therein lies the challenge to tourism firing on all.
Right.
New variant to knock it back and remain in this sort of Groundhog Day pattern. The other important thing to remember about inflation generally, but definitely in Hawaii, you can just look up the urban Hawaii statistics, is that it's being led, as elsewhere, by fuel costs, an anomalously high rate of inflation for used vehicles, and I'm not sure how much we should be concerned about that. And then to a much lesser extent, food costs. That's something we all see. We every time we go to the grocery store, we observe it. But in terms of its magnitude, it's at the high end of the range, but not like fuel costs. And of course, fuel costs are just coming from $20 a barrel oil 2 years ago in the sort of the COVID chasm to maybe a range of $80 to $90 a barrel, which could be sort of the equilibrium run rate, to as high as $130 a barrel a couple weeks ago as a consequence of the geopolitical catastrophe that is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, oil has come back to the $100 to $110 barrel range as we get further clarity about the nature of the conflict and the uncertainty. Unfortunately, the old rumor the old saying, buy the rumor, sell the fact, applies here because while the invasion hadn't occurred and the uncertainty about whether an invasion would occur, the uncertainty itself was problematic. But the uncertainty, unfortunately, was resolved by an actual invasion.
Right.
And so, as I say, oil around $100 a barrel, let's say, is a problem. But when $80 is the correct number, it's mostly, it feels crazy because it was $20 a barrel 2 years ago, and 80 is 60 to 80 where it was pre-COVID, and 100 to 120 was where it was back in in the early 20 teens, let's say. So we're essentially back to where we were a decade ago or so, and going up, the inflation is just a reversal of the deflation that occurred in the mid-20 teens. Those factors, energy and food costs, can't be resolved, can't be mitigated by monetary policy. The supply chain disruptions are not going to be resolved by raising interest rate targets or reducing the Fed's asset purchases, all of which are appropriate to the moment. The Fed should be normalizing monetary policy as U.S. economic recovery, moves back towards the long-term path of economic growth, moves the economy back towards an economic growth path of fuller employment. But unfortunately, the global supply chain disruptions, which are taking longer to disentangle, and are now complicated further by these East Asian coronavirus surges, are going to continue to impart inflationary pressure that can't be mitigated with monetary policy. And people just have to make choices about how much they're going to drive or what kinds of things they're going to eat. And people always do, right? They substitute lower items with less inflation for the items with more inflation. It's relative prices that matter. And that's partly how we'll get through this. Partly we get through it with appropriate monetary policy. Partly we'll get through it by shifting the mix of items that people consume or that businesses introduce into their own production processes, right? It's inflation in the input space that's problematic for businesses right now.
Right. Yeah, you bring up really good points. I wish we had more time, but what we're going to have to do, Paul, is bring you back again soon. But clearly we need to stay on COVID alert and be watchful, and we're going to have to rethink our consumables.
Get ready for a good summer. It could happen. I think this will be one of the great tourism summers if we can tamp down the remaining COVID risk.
Well, and last year, what a difference March makes, and we certainly are seeing that again this March. So that's awesome. And yes, so we want to see a good summer, and we want to just be on the lookout and continue to watch what's happening. Paul, thank you so much for joining us, but let's have you on again soon because you're such a treasure trove of information.
Anytime, Pam, and things are always changing, so never a dull moment.
Yes, never a dull moment. Thanks, Paul. You have a great day.
Aloha.
Aloha. If you're just tuning in, this is Business Matters brought to you by the Maui Chamber of Commerce. And we just wanted to share a quick update on one of the projects we're working on, which is to recognize amazing small businesses who have been doing outstanding things during COVID times in the annual Mayor's Small Business Awards. Now I say annual because on March 30th, we're actually going to be recognizing those who did such an awesome job in 2021. We're catching up as things have been opening up, but we will be doing it again in the fall. And so this is sort of like the Academy Awards for Maui Small Businesses, where all businesses nominated for the awards are recognized. And then, of course, there is a winner that's announced that night, which is really exciting. In the Young Business Person of the Year category, Outstanding Small Business category for 0 to 10 employees, for 11 to 30 employees is another category, and we're going to award a Lifetime Achievement Award as well as an Outstanding Nonprofit Award. So we hope you can join us. It is a great night of networking and celebration on March 30th at the Maui Beach Hotel from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. If you're interested, just visit us at www.mauichamber.com. It's now my pleasure to welcome Kit Okazaki of State Farm Insurance Agency. Kit was born and raised in upcountry Maui, a graduate of Seabury Hall. He earned his bachelor's degree from the Colorado College and his MBA from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He is a past board chair of the Maui Chamber of Commerce, past president of the Rotary Club of Upcountry Maui, and currently serves on the Board of Trustees for Seabury Hall. Kit is also a professional saxophonist and 3-time Hawaiian Music Award winner with the group he performs with. And we might remember him with Nuff Said. Kit is married with 2 children, and together they enjoy surfing, traveling, and playing sports. He is also, in his spare time, imagine that, a youth soccer coach in Makawao. Good morning and aloha, Kit.
Hey, Pam.
So
nice to be with you.
Oh, thanks. So glad to have you on the show. So this is a great time to talk about insurance, and you have the State Farm Insurance Agency, which we call the Okazaki Agency. So if you'll share with everybody how long you've been in this business, because it's been a while, and what inspired you to get started in the insurance realm.
Sure, Pam. Well, thanks again for having me on. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, and started more on the life and health annuity side, and transitioned into the property casualty side about 12 years ago when I opened my State Farm office up country, and so 20 years total. Time sure does fly.
Time does fly. And you've got a number of agents. You've got like 9 licensed insurance agents, and you folks are a phenomenal team. I can say personally, as well, that your customer service is spectacular, and I really appreciate it as one of the people insured by your agency. But tell us about some of the different insurance programs you offer, because you have a breadth of insurance, and I understand you even have pet insurance for the pet lovers out there.
Right, sure, we sure do. So State Farm specializes, and the 3 little circles that you see in our logo or brand, specialize in home, auto, and life insurance. So those are our primary areas of expertise. So we do a ton of home insurance, renters insurance, rental home insurance, condo insurance. We also do a ton of auto insurance, from personal use autos to commercial autos, and then life insurance. So we're big on the life insurance side. State Farm's one of the largest in the country in all of those 3 areas. So those are our primary areas of focus, but we also do a lot of business insurance as well. And we did just add a partnership with Trupanion to offer pet insurance. So that's been something that's fun for us to do. As I'm a pet lover myself, and upcountry Maui, we've got a lot of animals. From small animals to horses and a number of others as well. So that keeps us busy.
So it's very broad in terms of pet insurance. So it goes from small animals, like say a rabbit, to a horse.
Well, yeah, no, we're just doing small animals with the pet insurance, but we have a lot of insureds that have animals that range in size.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. And I'm a big pet lover as well. And people often, unfortunately, sometimes wish they'd gotten pet insurance when they go to the vet and they find out that their animal's sick, and the cost of either the surgery or the treatment program that the animal needs. So we want people to be proactive in their pet insurance. It's good to look at that in advance and just understand what the options are with pet insurance before things happen. Kid,
absolutely.
I've met a lot of people who are renters that don't really know about renters insurance. Can you tell people a little bit about what renters insurance is and why it's important?
Sure. Renters insurance, in my opinion, it's just a no-brainer to add that to your coverage. If you got an auto policy and you're renting, it does a few things for you. So first of all, it's going to cover your stuff, your contents there at your house, and it's going to cover it from a number of perils or a number of things, bad things that could happen to your stuff, and I'll kind of run over that here in a second. But it covers your stuff there at your house and outside if you're traveling or you got things in your car and that type of thing. It also gives you liability coverage. So liability coverage, it's primarily on the renters and homeowner side, primarily protects you against like bodily injury or property damage that you might be responsible for or negligent in creating. And then finally, it gives you loss of use coverage. And what loss of use coverage is, it means it puts you up someplace in the event that something happens to the rental home. That's a covered claim on, and basically pays for you to stay someplace else where the home's being restored or repaired. And, some of the things that the renter's policy does protect you against would be like damage to the home due to things like fire or lightning, windstorm or hail, smoke damage, vandalism, theft, falling objects like trees or branches that might damage the roof or the structure, explosions, impact by vehicle or aircraft. And by far our most common homeowner's claim throughout the country represents about 40% of our losses on the home, renters, and condo side is that sudden water discharge from the plumbing or appliance. So if something like that were to happen, damage the home, the renter's policy pays for you to stay someplace else where that's being repaired, covers your stuff, subject to your renter's policy deductible, of course. And so it really does quite a few things for it. And if you do purchase the renter's policy from the carrier that you're getting your auto insurance from, you get the home auto discount. And a lot of times, it almost pays for itself. So it really is a no-brainer to get that renter's coverage.
You know, I was turned on to that many years ago, and when I was a renter, I always had it. And this morning on the news, we saw that apartment building in Honolulu where there was a fire, and they're trying to figure it out, whether it was a candle burning or something else. But all of those folks saw their units go up in smoke, and of course, probably with it, many of their home goods and furniture and everything else. So it's a great policy to have, and it's great to know that, you know, if you already have an auto policy, you can add it on. And as Kit says, it really can pay for itself. So, great to know that people can learn more. And you do life insurance as well. Talk for a moment about how important that is to have in your life.
Life insurance is one of those really critical policies that no one really wants to talk about. You're not hanging out at the barbecue with your friends and talking about what kind of life coverage you have. People don't really want to think about that, but the reality is that at some point we are all going to transition on, and having some protection in place. Having life insurance is really about sort of protecting your income, right? And so we're trying to plan and save for retirement in the future and for our kids and all of these things, but having that life coverage in place really protects our ability to save and plan for the future. So having some life coverage is I think really critical, especially if you've got dependents. But even if you don't, having something in place for like final expenses or just kind of wrapping things up, if you don't have that, sort of in a savings account, that makes a ton of sense as well. And with life, there's really two types of policies. There's a term policy and a permanent policy. So term is something that's been established a little bit more recently, but basically it's pure insurance. So you pick a term, and that's the length that the policy protects you, and the length of your premium is fixed at. And you pick that term, maybe the 20 years probably the most common. And during that 20-year period of time, your rate is fixed. It can't go up and down no matter what happens to your health.
Kit, we're gonna have to. We'll have everybody. Maybe we can put some information up on our podcast. We've got to unfortunately end the show, but we want people to know that life insurance is really important, and we want you to go to State Farm Insurance Agency owned by Kit Okazaki. It always goes quick here on Business Matters, but thank you for joining us today. I'm Pamela Tumpop with the Maui Chamber of Commerce, wishing you blessings and best wishes for a beautiful Maui day. Aloha.